Hello and welcome to this video. It's that time of the year again where you're going to have friends and family members asking you, what do you want for Christmas? And if you're like me, your mind usually goes blank. However, there's lots of cool things that I use on my bench all the time and stuff that you may not have that are very, very handy if you're into radio control. So I thought, let me do a quick roundup. I'll put links down below and time codes. So you might have an idea in your head for that when that inevitable question comes and someone asks you, what do you want for Christmas? You could have an answer. So the first piece of kit is this thing here. This is the ViFly ShortSaver V2. It's been around for a little bit of time. You plug your battery into it and then your model on the other side, and it's kind of a current limiter. It has two settings for the amount of current that it will cut off at. But the other thing, which is the most important thing about this, is it has an on and off button. Why is that important? Well, if you're playing and tinkering with models and binding receivers and testing things all the time, having the ability to just press a button and apply and take away power is incredibly handy. This is something that is getting used all the time. It's probably one of my favorite little gadgets on the entire bench. So if you don't have one of these and you're regularly building and commissioning models and you want to make it so that it's safer for the commissioning but also far easier to do things like power cycle an ELRS receiver 3 times quickly or do something else, this is a fat piece of kit. Second idea are prop spanners. You can never have enough prop spanners. I was flying the other day and we left all of the prop spanners back in the boot of the car, and then when we got to the field I realised that one of my prop nuts was loose and then we had to trudge all the way back. Having prop spanners hanging off your jacket, in your pockets, everywhere when you go to fly is incredibly handy. Now there's loads of different versions. I particularly like this Emax one. I think it's not even available anymore, but I would recommend, if you haven't got a couple of these things hanging around, get yourself a couple, put one in the bag with your radio, but also keep one in whatever you keep your batteries in and things like that. It just means that when you get to the flight line and there's an issue, you can just nip up the prop without a problem. Now, I have been cutting ones out of acrylic for kind of keyring things with my new laser engraver. That's been quite fun. I've modified the design because the 10mm ones can snap when you really kind of pressure them, but the metal ones are the best. They just take all the punishment and it just stops you from getting stuck at the flight line when you realize that something's come loose. Now, with the rise in the cost of all the electronics for flight controllers, GPSs, things like that, it's now a relatively significant investment to get yourself a new flight controller and GPS. So that is another option too. Now, I have my spares bin, which has a number of Matec flight controllers and ones from SpeedyBee and all that kind of stuff. Having a spare or two is always great because it means that if you do get the opportunity to build a new model, you've got stuff that's there ready to rock and roll. Or if you want to flash it with the latest version of iNav or ArduPilot or Betaflight or whatever and just see what all that new stuff is about, you have a test rig on the bench that you can play with. So just another thought, maybe getting a new Matec flight controller and GPS for the next build and putting it down ready for the spring when you're going to build something is an idea too. Along with the flight controllers and GPSs, then the other option is to ask people to get you a receiver. Now, with Express LRS becoming much more of a standard now, and the receivers being relatively inexpensive, they're not going to break the bank, but it's very handy to have a handful of them around, particularly if you've just moved to Express LRS from another system. It's an opportunity for you to migrate away from maybe some of the older stuff that you might still be using to cut down on the things that you have to take to the field. So that's another thought, maybe a receiver. The ones like the Radio Master receivers are very good. I'm also a fan of the new Beta FPV D series. That's their new diversity series with temperature controlled oscillation. They're really, really good receivers. So that's also another idea too to have in your back pocket. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's obviously getting very dark. As you can see, I've had to have all the lights on here to do the filming. So there's options to play with radio control while the wind and the rain and the snow and the sleet and everything else is hammering outside. Whoops are lots of fun to fly around the house, but also things like little radio controlled cars are amazing fun too. A lot of them now come with FPV. If you can get you one and maybe your friend gets one, you can kind of do little races around. It's like those Micro Machines games that we used to play back in the day on things like PlayStation. You can actually kind of do that in real life. Another big tip is a battery discharger. Now this is my BD200. I've had it for quite a long time now. This isn't available. The one that's currently available for sale is something called the BD250. This is one where you plug your battery in when you get back from the field. You can set it for a specific amperage, set it for a specific target voltage to turn off at, and it will just sit there and discharge the battery. It's essentially just a blooming big heatsink with a fan on top, and it just puts the battery down to save storage charge. If, like me, you don't always get to fly all the batteries that you charge and take to the field, this is a great way to keep those batteries in tip-top condition and discharge them safely down to the right level. While we're talking about discharging things, let's talk about powering things as well. Now, most of us probably already have a charger that we like. That's also another idea, but I found this very handy as well. Now, this is a bench power supply from Toolkit RC. This is the P200 bench power supply. It isn't particularly cheap, but I found it incredibly useful. When I want to power a piece of kit with a specific voltage, this is a great way to do it. And using the crocodile clips at the front, I can just clip it onto whatever, whether it's testing ESCs or flashing and activating DJI Air units, or whether it's doing things like binding Express LRS receivers, or whether it's doing things like updating walk snail avatar units. This is great. You can just set it for the voltage that you want, clip it on, power it up, and then not only do you know that the exact voltage that's needed is going to be going to that piece of kit while you're doing all your testing and setup, it also means that the battery and things that's connected to it isn't going to give up the ghost halfway through the update and break that piece of kit. I would recommend this if you are a serious builder. Having something like this on the bench is great. It's powered from a battery, if you want to do it like that, but it's also powered from AC as well, and it just gives you that peace of mind when you're going to spend 15-20 minutes doing something to configure and set up a piece of kit and it needs power. The quality of the antennas that you fly with make a massive difference. I'm a big fan of MenaceRC here. They have their antenna packs for both analog and digital systems as well, and they've just recently released their periscope antennas, the really long ones that are great to go on top of digital goggle systems too. I've got two of them here to go on top of my walk snails. They're RPSMA connections and the left-hand circular polarized. If you are thinking about something that's quite cute to suggest to somebody to get you, these are available from loads of different places and they work incredibly well. Greg does a great job of designing those antennas, and things like the aeropods are also a nice idea if you're a fixed wing person and you don't want a big antenna stuck out in the airflow causing loads of drag too. Last couple of ideas. If you haven't already got one of these on your bench, modern radio control is a lot about electronics, and you will end up needing one of these. Now, I've done a number of videos showing you how to use a multimeter, but having a multimeter is worth its weight in gold. There are loads available. You can get them from places like Amazon. Even cheap and cheerful multimeters that cost £20, $20 are better than nothing. Now, you can get some really funky stuff that, connects to your phone and all kinds of jazz. You don't need that. Simple basic multimeter will allow you to do things like test continuity, test the voltages you think are at places are actually at places, test things like resistance, make sure that you haven't got any dead shorts on your power supply before you plug things in, before you use your ViFly ShortSaver V2. They are incredibly useful. So if you haven't already got one of these, get one. There are loads of times where I'm trying to help somebody and we need to do some basic electronic tests, and the lack of one of these stops us in our tracks. Another fab bit of kit that I would recommend, that I use quite a bit here, is this thing. This is the SpeedyBee Adapter V2. This can be powered from a battery, and it means that you can power up your flight controller, and then you have a connection to your phone and you can set up your iNav and Betaflight settings and other things too. Now has USB-C and micro USB connections on it, so you can use either. it's incredibly handy to change things at the field. If you want to tweak something or change a flight mode or that kind of stuff, and the flight controller you're using isn't one that has that Wi-Fi or Bluetooth ability, this allows you to access and play with it. I find it incredibly useful, and I usually end up plugging it into my mate's flight controllers when we're tweaking with stuff just as much as it gets plugged into mine. It can be hanging off your keychain, and when you need it, this is one of those little things that's worth its weight in gold. Last idea is a little bit more expensive. Get yourself one of the new action cameras. There's loads of action cameras that are out on the market now that support gyro flow, give you 4K, and lots of them don't have internal batteries as well. My favourites right now are going to be the Cadix Peanut, which they seem to have stopped making. So if you can find one, I definitely get one of those. That's my #1 camera. Can do stabilization internally. It's fantastic. I'm a big fan of the Runcam Thumb Pro, the new wide version that has a 155-degree field of view, has gyro flow, 4K, super lightweight, will fit pretty much everywhere. Great piece of kit. And then there's also things like the new Cadix Walnut. The Cadix Walnut is that box camera that I looked at recently. Again, these are slightly more expensive pieces of kit, but it's really fun to be able to add extra things. If you want to come home and kind of edit a little bit of a sizzle reel of your flying day, it's kind of fun not only to have your HD view out the front of whatever it is you're flying, but also actually setting these up to have a view out the back to look at where you've been, particularly if there's a couple of you chasing each other around the sky or through the trees. It can make for really fun filming. So there we have it. Those are my ideas. Thank you to my patrons who've added a couple to this list. Again, links and time codes all down below, but hopefully now if someone collars you, or you know somebody that's into radio control and you've been linked to this video, you now have an idea of some of the things you can get for those people. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that if you're trying to learn a topic will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.